genus that we're going to look at, and there's only one, and that's Andromeda. And we have Pinus japonica, or Japanese Pinus. And this is in the family Ericaceae. The light preference for Japanese Pinus has full sun to partial sun, and the soil preference is a moist, well-drained soil. Now, even though this plant looks like it's deciduous, that it's going to lose its leaves, this is evergreen, and the leaves are going to persist here. The leaves have a glossy green appearance to them, and they're moderately sized, about 1.5 inches to 3.5 inches long, and 1/2 inch to about 1 inch wide as well. And the leaf is going to be the largest and at the widest point, and that is in the middle of the leaf. The leaf margins have very shallow serrations, but it is going to be lightly serrated. And it has a whorled leaf arrangement. It has an almost clustering of the foliage at the tips. The new emerging foliage usually has that reddish coloration to it, and that's what you see in the photo. That's the red new foliage that is coming and has emerged. The flowers are very small, white, and almost urn-shaped, and they're 1/4 inch long, and they're pendulous. They're about 3 inches to 6 inches long, clustered itself if you look at the full inflorescence. They usually bloom in March and April, and they persist through this month-long period. The flowers don't have a huge scent to them. It's very weakly fragrant. And there are many cultivars that are available for Pinus japonica, with flowers in various shades of white, pink, and rose as well. Now we're going to get into the genus Pinus, or pines. And pines are needle-leaved evergreen trees and shrubs. The leaves are in fascicles. These fascicles are bundles, usually in bundles of 2, 3, or 5 needles per bundle. And the cones vary. And we can classify this with either hard pines or soft pines. Soft pines have 5 needles per fascicle, and hard pines usually have 2 to 3 needles per fascicle. So why it's called a soft pine, whenever you have a lot of these different, if we have 5 different needles per fascicle, it's usually a lot more softer to touch compared to the hard pines with 2 to 3 needles. This usually pricks you a little bit and has a harder feel to it. The first pine we're going to go over is Pinus bungiana, or lacebark pine. This is in the same family of the spruces again, in Pinaceae, and then we have a light preference to full and partial sun, and then a soil preference to a more moist or well-drained soil. For the needles for Pinus bungiana, we have 3 needles per fascicle, so this is going to be considered a hard pine. And then these needles are medium to dark green and 2 to 4 inches long. For Pinus bungiana, the bark is the most ornamental feature. It has exfoliating bark which peels, somewhat like a sycamore that you might see, and it reveals the underlying patchwork. It's white, olive, sometimes light purple and silver, eventually becoming milky to white at maturity. But this exfoliation of the bark doesn't actually occur. It takes about 10 years for the bark to begin exfoliating. And it will take even longer to get to that milky white bark at full maturity. And for the cones for Pinus bungiana, we have cones that are small, yellowish brown cones that are 2 inches long. This is a slow-growing conifer, which typically grows about 30 to 50 feet tall at maturity. Pinus cembra is Swiss stone pine. We have the same family. The light preference preferably is going to be that full sun, but if you see this yellow mark here, it can do fine with that partial sun to shade, but it's going to prefer that full sun. And if you see an X right here, that means it absolutely does not do good in those conditions. So we have a light preference of full sun and then a soil preference of either dry soils or well drained to moist soils. So with Pinus sembra, it has 5 needles per fascicle, so it's going to be a soft pine. And it also has very soft, dark green to blue green needles that are 2 to 5 inches long, and it has those stemmatic lines, okay, that you're going to see on those needles. So you're going to look for those stemmatic lines that are going to be vertical. And we also have short-stalked oblong cones that are 2.5 inches long. Usually these cones are greenish purple when young and then maturing to a purplish brown. Just to note, these cones never actually open. And the cone seeds are edible. Pinus sembra is slow-growing, medium-sized pine tree with a narrow pyramidal shape when it's young, and then gradually it becomes more rounded and more open as it matures. Typically grows around 30 to 40 feet, but can grow up to 100 feet in the wild. Pinus flexilis, or also known as limber pine, has a light preference of full sun to partial sun and a soil preference of moist, well-drained soils. So Pinus flexilis has needles within 5 needles per fascicle, so that is also going to be a soft pine. It has dark green to bluish green needles that are 3.5 inches long. Pinus flexilis is short-stalked. It has thick scaled brown cones that are 8 inches long, and the cones fall to the ground without disintegrating as well. Pinus flexilis also grows 25 to 60 feet tall with the pyramidal habit maturing over time to a more rounded form. Now, Pinus mugo or mugo pine has a light preference of full sun, partial sun, and then a soil preference of very moist, well-drained soils. Pinus mugo has 2 needles per fascicle, so it's going to be a hard pine. And it has bright green needles that are about 1 to 3 inches long, and it has a dense-looking appearance. Pinus mugo has an oval to conical dull brown female cone that's about 2.5 inches long, and also has a very scaly brown-gray bark. Pinus mugo is usually bushy, multi-stemmed shrub or broad, rounded small tree that grows about 15 to 20 feet tall. But mature plants typically exhibit a dense habit, usually growing wider than tall. Pinus nigra, or Austrian pine, has a light preference of full sun and then a soil preference of moist, well-drained soils. Pinus nigra has 2 needles per fascicle, so it is going to be a hard pine. And it has stiff, dark green needles that are 3 to 6 inches long. The cones on Pinus nigra are oval to stalkless, and they're 3 inches long, and they mature to a brown coloration. Pinus nigra is considered to be medium to large conifer, and this tree grows 40 to 60 feet tall over time, and even up to 100 feet tall. This tree does exhibit a dense pyramidal habit in youth, and the crown browns as the tree matures, forming and spreading to a flat top or dome. The next species that we're going to look at is Pinus parviflora, which is Japanese white pine. And the light preference here is full sun to partial sun, and the soil preference is moist, well-drained soils. Pinus parviflora has 5 needles per fascicle, and this is usually twisted. So since it has 5 needles per fascicle, it's going to be a soft pine. And each needle is also going to have an attractive white line, that stomatal line on that needle, so you can look for that as well. The cones are oval, reddish brown, and it has the cones are 4 inches long. The tree has a conical formation that will grow about 50 to 70 feet tall in its native habitat, but usually within cultivation, it's about 20 to 40 feet tall. It's very dense and it tends to develop spreading branches, and it almost has a flattened crown as the tree matures. Pinus resinosa is red pine, and red pine prefers full sun and has a soil preference of dry soil conditions. Pinus resinosa has bundles of the needles within 2 needles per bundle or per fascicle. And that was the same within Pinus nigra, but here with Pinus resinosa, whenever you bend that needle, it actually snaps. With Pinus nigra, it does not snap, it bends, it flexes. Pinus resinosa is very sharply pointed and has yellow to dark green needles that are 4 to 6 inches long. So the cones for Pinus resinosa are ovid, at least with the female cones. They are 2.5 inches long at maturity, and they actually mature to a chestnut brown coloration the second year. And another indicator for Pinus resinosa is the seeds within the cone do not prick you whatsoever. They're soft. They will not prick. Pinus resinosa has a conical formation, very straight trunked, and has a horizontal to ascending branching and an oval to rounded crown. And it typically grows about 50 to 80 feet tall. Pinus strobus is white pine. The light preference is full sun, and the soil preference is moist to well drained. Pinus strobus has 5 needles per fascicle, making this a soft pine. The cones for Pinus strobus are cylindrical, round cones, 4 to 8 inches long, and are usually not produced until 5 to 10 years. Pinus strobus is rapid growing, long-lived evergreen that has a pyramidal form in its early years, but also matures to a more broad oval habitat and grows 50 to 80 feet in cultivation, but natively it can grow up to 100 feet tall. And lastly, for our pines, we have Pinus sylvestris, or Scotch pine. Scotch pine has a light preference of full sun and a soil preference of moist, well-drained soils. Pinus sylvestris has 2 needles per fascicle, making this a hard pine, and it has blue-green twisted needles that are 3 inches long. The cones for Pinus sylvestris are gray to light brown and are 3 inches long, and has different scaly orange red bark in the upper part of the tree. And here you can see that orange brown bark, that nice coloration, and that winter peel that Scotch pine has. Pinus sylvestris is fast growing. It has a conical shape, and it's medium-sized conifer as well, and it has a distinctive flaky orange-red bark. Typically grows about 30 to 60 feet tall in cultivation, but it can also reach 100 feet in its native habitat or in the wild.